Hi, my name is Eva Steiner, and this is my project Psychotherapists Around the Globe. I am interviewing the psychotherapists around the world and asking them the same 8 questions. I am wondering how mental health profession is in their country. Today we are going to. Thank you for taking this time for doing this interview with me. Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's a project that I find amazing and I'm really grateful for being here. My name is Cristina Siquela. I am Mozambican, born and raised in Mozambique. I started my journey into the world of psychotherapy in 2012 when I decided to take my bachelor in psychology. So that was the beginning of my journey. Once I finished my bachelor's in psychology, I decided to start another bachelor in international relations just out of curiosity. I've always found of the international world and different perspectives. So I wanted to have a more deep understand of how the world works. And after that, I decided to specialize myself in psychotherapy, more specifically in the field of family and community psychotherapy.
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
working more specifically as a school counselor in an international school. With school counselor, I would say that I have the chance to apply a short version of psychotherapy, but in a school environment.
Tell me a little bit about your culture. What is some holiday or tradition that your country celebrates? And if your country would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
My country is culturally diverse. We have many different costumes and traditions. We have different religion approaches. We have Islam, we have Christians. And in terms of habits too, we have three main regions in the country. We have South, Center, and North. And in those different regions, you will find different costumes and habits. But I would say that generally, we all celebrate our, let's say, festive days with songs, art, poetry. Music is a way of expressing ourselves, I would say, in the whole country. We have Portuguese as our official language, but we also have around 45 local languages, which are the languages that we speak the most, I would say. It's true that we have Portuguese as the language that unites the whole country, because if we see the different regions, we will find different traditional languages there. So Portuguese is the language that unites us. And dates that we celebrate our holidays, we do celebrate Christmas, we celebrate Ramadan because we have Islam here, we have Christians. We celebrate Women's Day. It's true that the country is mainly patriarchal, but the role of women is actually gaining more visibility. And that's the reason why, apart from celebrating the International Women's Day, we also have a holiday specifically for Mozambican Women's Day. We also
Oh,
celebrate
interesting.
Heroes Day because Mozambique, I would call an adolescent nation when it comes to becoming a republic, because we only became independent in 1975. This is the main reason why we celebrate Heroes Day, to honor all the heroes that fought and gave their lives to make us an independent country.
And if your country would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
It's quite interesting because as we are so diverse, I see different tendencies in the whole country. But overall, I would say joy. Joy because despite the hardships that we go through as a nation, we have many challenges as any other nation or societies. But despite all the hardships, we always find ways of celebrating, of smiling, of enjoying life. Maybe joy accompanied by resilience. I find Mozambicans quite resilient because we always find a way to face the challenges, keep going. But whenever we can celebrate, we are always smiling and celebrating.
So how did you become a psychotherapist in your country, and what is your therapeutic approach?
In my country, I became a psychotherapist when I decided to specialize myself in the area of psychotherapy by embracing a master's in family and community therapy. That was basically, we do have some institutions here with master's degrees in related areas. We don't have psychotherapy below master's, like in a level that is below master's degree, such as bachelor. You do any other bachelor, and then you can specialize in psychotherapy.
Can you tell me more about the communal therapy?
Basically, how does it work in the family therapy? Like even for community, it's actually, I will say that the only difference is the level that you are able to work with, or the people that you can target, I would say. So we work with individuals, families, but also with larger communities. And by community, we mean it can be an organization, it can be an area like in a neighborhood, any kind of group that we will consider community. Then we bring the psychotherapy approach focused on the community's point of view. But in general, I would say we focus on systemic approach. Every client or family or community we work with has part of the same system, is having an holistic point of view about the community, understanding that in that community, every member plays a role. If we have a problem, a specific problem, we start from the point that we don't look at one single element. We may see different behaviors or manifestation in one particular element of the community, but we assume that the whole community is playing a role for that problem to be manifesting. So instead of just limiting ourselves to an office, for example, in an office we will see individuals, we will see families, but we also go to different communities. I have had the chance to work with different neighborhoods, and there the approach is always the same. You go to a community and they will tell you, for example, that the level of domestic violence is quite high in the community. It starts affecting some people of the community to the point that it's a problem that needs to be addressed. And what are we going to do? As community psychotherapists, we will involve every member of the community that we can to assess. We won't say, for example, that, oh, it's a problem that's coming specifically from that family and that's all we are going to work with that family. No. So every member of the community will play a role. And the same happens in terms of the intervention. When we design the interventions, we see the different levels. From where are we starting? There are moments that we isolate certain people, okay, but it's the same that we do with families, for example. There are moments we isolate the parents and we say, okay, for now we are only working with the children. There are moments we bring everyone together. So the same happens in the community. We could say, okay, for this time, we will be working with the man of the community, for example. And there are days through the intervention that will say, today we want to have everyone together and see how they interact, that their interaction dynamics, and we explore their beliefs, their values. Yeah. So I would say that the main difference we would find in individual, family, and community therapy when it comes to these systemic approaches that you just have different groups or different elements. When it's individual, it is the individual. But even when we're working with the individual, we always consider the environment that individual is involved in. We go with the family, the perspective is the same. Things are not isolated. Everything is working together. Everything is affecting the whole system. We go to the community, is the same idea. The problem is not just with that particular area or that particular neighborhood. It's basically assuming that when we have a certain problem, everyone will play a role. The same happens in institutions. We will identify some people or some professionals that are going through a certain problem. And if we see that somehow it affects the whole system, we won't see that particular professional has that's the problem. We will have to work with everybody. It's basically having an holistic and cerebral perspective about the problem that we are dealing with.
And how society looks upon psychotherapy or any psychological help?
Although we have the field, there's still a lot of stigma and taboos around psychotherapy or psychological help in general. About why? First, because Mozambique, and I would say that many other African countries, we do have different approaches of dealing with mental health in general. And I would say most of the approaches related to our traditional perspectives. So I would say psychotherapy here is seen as scientific and Western way of dealing with mental health or psychological health. But what we use the most, I would say, has the population in general. We will always go first to our traditional approaches when it comes to psychological health, because there is this collectivist way of living that I mentioned before. So let's say any kind of a psychological pain or condition that is noticed in the family will normally be interpreted not as something that is happening in the moment, but has a result of things that happened in the past. For example, the people in general believe that our ancestors still have some kind of influence in our well-being in general. So the most predominant approach when it comes to dealing with psychological issues or suffering is the traditional approach.
And what would that be concretely? Like, what is the traditional approach that you are describing?
It's basically traditional medicine, traditional healers. So much so that our government has even recognized traditional medicine as an official approach to treatment. And this is the other thing. If you are not part of the traditional medicine, you don't have the full understanding of how it works. Only those that are there. It's like protected knowledge. You don't get to know everything that happens. Even the explanation, sometimes you hear some of the parts they will explain, but if you are not part of that community, you still wonder how things actually work. Apart from knowing how to deal with plants, like natural plants, there's also the spiritual world. A doctor in traditional medicine or a healer, there are those that use the approach that are able to communicate with ancestors, for example. And let's say we can have, for instance, we can have a situation where someone is exhibiting abnormal behaviors. Let's say someone has been suffering with, let's say even depression, to the point that is no longer able to normally function on a daily basis. Traditionally, this person would be taken to a consultation. It would be normal, for example, to hear an explanation that, oh, this is happening because a relative that died, let's say 50 years ago, 15 years ago, is demanding a particular thing from the family. And unless the family carries on with what needs to be done, the person won't be healed. So we have this predominant side, our costumes, like our relationship with our ancestors is something that is really valued. And to that end, we see that psychotherapy is received with questions, with doubts, and it's very common to see someone that attends therapy or psychotherapy, but is also following another treatment approach traditionally. Seeing a psychotherapist is something that will usually be seen with a lot of stigma, like, oh, you see a psychotherapy, are you okay? Are you crazy? And that's the first question that you get. Are you crazy? Yeah. And so people struggle to even open up about this kind of help.
Is it viewed differently when you go out and do like a community therapy, because then the whole community is involved? Is it perceived differently or also approached with skepticism?
Initially, there is always skepticism, but it takes time for people to accept it, and they have to see that it works. But initially, there's always skepticism. But with time, and when they are able to understand how it works, they can easily open up and just welcome the approach. We do that, but it's always very important to make sure that the community values and beliefs are safeguarded. It's like,
Yeah.
we bring psychotherapy as an additional approach to work with, but we always safeguard the local beliefs and values. So it's basically bringing an additional tool, like, okay, we have this, you have been using this, but there is also this approach. It doesn't harm to try. And that's how it's spreading. That's how people are getting to know this approach. But I would say it's quite new in Mozambique. Yeah.
And what is your society teaching about child-parent relationship, and whether these values of society also influence how you design your intervention as a therapist?
Well, the child-parent relationship in Mozambique, the child will always respect the parent. So the parent somehow holds authority when it comes to the child. The parent has the duty to protect and foster, let's say, a health environment for the child's growth. And on the other hand, the child will somehow become a subordinate of what is set. Basically, the lifestyle will always be based on the parents' beliefs and values. So as a child, what happens that the child will just follow the rules, the values, beliefs that are passed to him by the parents. Nowadays, because of globalization and the access to information, we have been noticing a lot of changes. I would say that 20 years ago, the parent had the power to say something, and the child would, I would say, blindly follow. But now, because we see different styles of parenting, it's very normal for parents to, in some families, we will see that there is a tendency to change and say, okay, I know my child will respect me, but I also have to do the same. It becomes an equal approach when it comes to sharing power. For example, it's listening to the child. Instead of the parent being the one that is imposing everything, nowadays there are families that are taking different approaches and making sure the children also have a saying in the house, they participate. So parents become mainly the guides, but will make sure children are also listened to and they feel comfortable to share anything they need to share. About say that 20 years ago it wasn't exactly like that. There were questions that children weren't even able to make at home. So normally they would find some adults outside, mainly teachers, and ask whenever they were curious about, because they knew that at home, if they decided to ask, it will become a problem. Like, hey, how dare you ask me something like this? For girls, for example, children are naturally curious. As they grow up, they have questions about things they see, they experience. That let's say we have a child that is becoming a teenager, and there are questions that have to do with puberty. 20 years ago, I would say children wouldn't feel comfortable to ask questions about it. Even today, there are still families where children will have no idea about what puberty is inside their homes, because they are not given the space. So the level of intimacy, of the level of the relationship, how close the proximity is different.
And do you see this translating also into the client-therapist relationship, in the sense that a client look at you as a parent and accept and expect guidance from you?
Somehow it does, because there is always the transference in the process. When working with children, first as an adult, they will have the same questions. Even in terms of trust, I have noticed that in my own practice, it always takes time for them to trust the therapist, because as an adult, it's easy to recall that parent figure and just project it to the therapist. It becomes the therapist's role to demystify some of the beliefs, and it starts basically from ensuring, like, building trust, to the
Yeah.
point that the idea of that parent figure is disconstructed. Of course, something that as a therapist, I'll say we always do is make sure the family values are also safeguarded. So it
Yeah.
becomes somehow like a nuanced game. Like, okay, you want to be the therapist, you're the professional. You want to disconstruct the idea of that one more adult and parent like adult in that child's life. But on the other hand, you cannot go against the family values.
And what are the learned beliefs regarding client-therapist relationship, and can the relationship continue outside the therapy once the therapy process is over?
Psychotherapy itself is not fully regulated, has a separate field of intervention in Mozambique. It's different from what you find, for example, in United States, where you have specific and clear regulations about the different fields of psychotherapy. Here, I would say that it's still quite a free market. First, because we don't have many therapists. Second, because we still have the stigma. The National Health Department is the one that provides most of the services in mental health. But then we have some private practitioners, but we don't have very clear regulations specifically for psychotherapy. so far everything is linked to the Ministry of Health, and the field of psychotherapy itself, it's still growing. But I would say that the general guidelines when it comes to the relationship between the client and the therapist is that dual relationships need to be avoided. So the relationship must be completely professional. Why? Because, and we have these recommendations like from the training stage. We will always get these recommendations because when the therapist keeps like a dual relationship, the therapeutic work can easily be compromised. It's easy for the therapist to even deal with that particular client with bias involved. So dual relationships are not recommended. And once the therapy is over, the recommendation that we have is that we keep it professional. We never know. That same client might come back to you 2-3 years after the therapeutic process is over. And in order not to compromise the whole work that has been done before, the recommendation is to always keep it professional.
Is supervision a must for a therapist in your country?
It is. That's the recommendation that we get even during training, and even for the well-being of the therapist. However, I know that there are some that are not using, and who is regulating that? Who is checking that? Ideally, every therapist needs to have supervision because it's a job that is quite emotionally demanding as well. So with supervision, therapists don't feel that they are carrying all alone.
What a client can do if it comes to therapeutic abuse?
Well, I would see some institutions linked to the government that safeguards the rights of clients in every kind of business. The client could just go to this particular institution and report the case.
Mm-hmm. Like a consumer protection,
Exactly.
something like that. And what are the most common complaints that the client come to therapy for?
Mainly mood disorders, I would say. Depression and anxiety have been the highlighted complaints, I would say. We also see quite a lot of relationship or familiar conflicts, and it usually starts from like psychosomatic symptoms. Clients will most always go first to a healthcare institution or service, and it's usually from there that they're then referred to services in psychotherapy. It's still quite new. I mean, the psychotherapy field, but for mental health in general, we see that we have many other like organic disorders, and epilepsy is what I think dominates, and schizophrenia is what dominates the mental health demand in terms of what we see in our public institutions, I would say. But for psychotherapy itself, the most common complaints will almost always be related to depression and anxiety.
How can you practice as a therapist? Through organizations or privately or both?
Both, but the most common so far is private. It's a new field in Mozambique. So not many organizations are aware of the benefits of having a psychotherapist. And we don't have like big organizations that are structured solely for psychotherapy. So the private practice is the most predominant way of doing psychotherapy in Mozambique. but there is a growing approach too, which is psychoanalysis. It's really growing in Mozambique. It's done through the partnership with professionals that are well established in other countries. I, for example, have been training as a psychoanalyst for the last 3 years, and it's an ongoing process.
And what are the other ones?
It's mainly the systemic, the psychoanalysis and cognitive behavior approach.
If you would share one tool, belief, or approach that is a must-have for you as a therapist, what would that be?
I think having an open mind, an eclectic way of working. By that, I mean, my country is diverse. And we also deal with people that come from many other countries. In psychotherapy, when we meet the different clients that we meet, we realize that we can't be locked in one single perspective. So, although my approach, for example, is the systemic approach, but I will always explore other approaches as well. I would say in my practice, I will use techniques and strategies that come from the cognitive and behavioral therapy. There are situations where I realize that psychoanalysis is what is needed for that particular case. You have to be able to work with free association. I feel like every situation will always demand different types of interventions. So keeping an open mind and embracing an eclectic approach is of paramount importance if you are working in Mozambique. Like don't be closed. Don't be solely focused on the approach that was learned during the training, because you never know who you are interacting with. Local values and habits, those have to always be respected. I've had situations where I met some of my fellow workers with closed approaches to the point that they would easily undervalue the traditional approaches, for example, that I mentioned before. I find that quite unproductive to do, because if you are having a client that values traditional medicine or has religion beliefs, the idea is to embrace those beliefs as well. Like, by embrace, I mean is acknowledging those beliefs and values, but still find ways to work with the particular client, showing your different perspectives. But those values need to be safeguarded as well. We don't have to change those values. The idea is, what can we bring more? How can we make this much more enriched? So an eclectic approach, I think, is of paramount for whoever is practicing psychotherapy in Mozambique.
Thank you. Thank you for taking this time and doing this interview with me.
Thank you. My pleasure.